Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage to join Secretary Perry, María Fernanda Suárez Londoño, Minister of Energy and Mines for Colombia, and our moderator, Luis Alberto Moreno, President of the Inter-American Development Bank.
Luis. Secretary. Well, Secretary, let me begin by saying that in having this conversation with you and Minister Suárez, one of the major developments that we've seen over the last decade and a half is how this hemisphere went from being a hemisphere that was a net importer of energy to now being an exporter of energy. And in this case, you know, you have a country like Colombia with over 17,000 megawatt capacity. You correct me, Minister, but roughly around there. And the interesting thing is that most of our energy matrix is still very clean. 70% is hydro. By the way, throughout Latin America, especially South America, much of the energy that we produce is still hydro. But climate change is changing that. And how do we adapt to those challenges? And we heard President Duque how he wants to really push to have more renewable energies, when today you only have about 1%. And we've seen it at the IDB, financing hundreds of projects in every country from wind to solar, which at today's prices, even though they don't conform part of the base load, they basically have come down significantly. So tell us a little bit, Minister Suárez, how you are working on that.
Okay, well, good morning and happy to be with all you this morning. Well, currently, what you were mentioning, Luis Alberto, it's part of the paradox that we are seeing in Colombia. We have the 6th cleanest energy matrix in the world. However, we are amongst one of the 20 most vulnerable countries to climate change due to our concentration on hydro. So whenever there is these periods of Niño phenomenon, we start to suffer regarding our supply for energy. And definitely that's something that it's one of the reasons why we're working so hard in the introduction of variable renewables like solar and wind. So as President Duque mentioned, we did have a reliability auction where we were able to set up projects for 1,398 megawatts, and that is a significant advance because that amounts for around 6% of the matrix. We are in the process of developing another auction that are long-term contracts that we will be having in the second semester of 2019. And those projects will be looking to increase that from 6% to 8 or 10%. Also, in the National Development Plan that the Congress just passed, we did have some tax incentives in our variable renewables, and also the demand side will be obliged to buy renewables in case that we need to do an obligatory mechanism.
And that basically is because the minute the hydro goes down, as we saw recently, 50% of our energy had to come from other sources different than hydro. But talk to us, Secretary, you were talking about what you at the Energy Department are seeing in terms of energy diversification in the Americas. Yeah. And tell us from the US experience. I remember meeting you when you were governor of Texas, and that was the big issue at the time, and today, you know, it's amazing. You know, you have the United States producing close to 12 million barrels of oil a day. You consume 20, but still it's been a huge revolution.
Yeah, and Luis, thank you for doing this, and Maria, thank you for your hospitality. And I like to remind people, because we live in such a fast-paced world with all this information that comes to us in 24/7. In 2005, I mean, literally a decade and a half ago, we were told that we had found all the fossil fuel energy that there was. And even if we found any more, it would be exorbitantly expensive to produce it, to bring it. So the conventional wisdom, the wise men in the room, so to speak, were telling us that we were done. And I think my message here is, just because conventional wisdom comes and says, you know, here's what's happening, and this is the gospel truth. For instance, there are people who say you can't use coal. The coal is done. It's a dirty fuel. Get rid of it. And we're working on projects at the Department of Energy, and the private sector is partnering with us on this as well, to find ways to use coal that have almost zero emissions. So my point is, please don't tell the American entrepreneur, or for that matter, an entrepreneur from Colombia, that you can't do something, that this is impossible to do. The human nature here is to find those things that people tell us we can't do. So the idea that we're making solar substantially cheaper now. The wind energy is growing. Small modular reactors that have zero emissions, and the ability to develop those. By 2025, we're going to have some of those ready to go out into the marketplace. So I happen to think the future of energy development is very bright. I think we've got a wide portfolio, if you will, to develop. And I haven't even mentioned LNG and the natural gas and the lowering of the emissions. The United States leads the world in the reduction of emissions today because of this transition from older, inefficient power plants into cleaner burning natural gas. We saw it happen in my home state as we were growing faster than any other state in the nation, creating jobs. And we lowered the SOx, the SOx, the sulfur dioxide, the NOx, the nitrogen dioxide, by 50 and 60% respectively over about a decade. And at the same time, we had a 20% reduction of carbon dioxide, total carbon dioxide. I mean, at the same time, we added 7 million people to our population during that period of time. You know what that means, Luis, in Texas? Yeah. That's a lot of pickup trucks, right?
A lot of industry.
Everybody went out and bought a new pickup truck. A lot of non-point source pollution. So your conventional wisdom would have told you, well, you did a good job of creating an economy and people have more money, but you had to play hell with your environment. But that wasn't the truth. So my point is that I like to tell people is, listen, the shale revolution, whether it's, and we had some of the same challenges you all had with hydraulic fracturing when it first came out. People were like, oh, how's that going to affect our water supply? How's that going to, what are the chemicals that you're using in this? You're shooting that all down in the ground. And people rightfully asking questions, but we addressed those both scientifically. The Texas legislature was one of the first to pass legislation to require public disclosure of all of the compounds and the chemicals that were used in the hydraulic fracturing so that the public was comfortable that they're doing this right and safe. And today, very accepted practice, and the United States leads the world in oil and gas production. So all of this I share with you because innovation and technology is what drove this. And the future can be bright in this country if we will continue to allow for technology and innovation to lead us as we go forward.
Thank you, Secretary and Minister. Speaking of innovation, you just created an energy transformation mission that precisely one of the areas is to look at all these sources of new technologies and innovation and how they can shape the new energy matrix of the future. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. And one word on what Secretary Perry was saying, I think that the key word is diversification. I think that the word cannot go and be extreme, one technology or the other. What the population will benefit the most is to have a matrix as diverse as it can, and if it can, and cleaner and cleaner and cleaner, using technology and innovation to make sure that it can be cleaner. So what we are doing right now is that we have this goal of achieving energy that is sustainable, affordable, and reliable. And with those three principles, we set up a mission of experts on that transition of energy. What we are foreseeing is that all the developments that we are seeing in technology regarding artificial intelligence, regarding blockchain, big data, etc., we need to make sure that the speed of innovation in the energy sector in Colombia is fast enough to make sure that the customers will see the benefits of those technologies in terms of having the energy at a more affordable prices, and that will allow us to have a country to be more competitive. We are also seeing that Colombia has been fortunate and lucky of the amount of resources that we have. So we have gas, we have oil, we have sun, we have wind, we have coal, you name it. Really, we have everything. What we need to make sure is that we make the best out of it, and that we have a full plan where we can have this benefit of having a matrix that is 70% hydro, and that is like the perfect battery for the introduction of variable renewables. So it's like the ideal matrix for any place in the world. So what we are looking forward for that mission to accomplish is to set the path, I will say, towards 2030 or 2025 in the different steps, to help us see how much we can include in our regulation all the innovation that needs to happen. But something that is very important for us is that development of this sector has been through private investment, and we wanted to keep to be it that way. So we need to be innovative but predictable at the same time. And that's quite challenging in terms of public policy. So that's part. And maybe another one that is very key is that, as President Duque mentioned, we have still 500,000 families that still does not have access to energy. So that is around 1.5 to 2 million Colombians with a country that is absolutely rich in energy sources that do not have access to energy. And the pace at which we are incorporating those populations to energy access is around, in the previous decades, it was like 50 to 60,000 households every 4 years. We have a goal in the National Development Plan to double it to 100,000 households, but it still is not enough, because in 2022, we will be out with 400,000 families still without energy access. So part of the mission is to find out how can we work out a model where subsidies are more efficient, or maybe that we can use the new technologies like microgrids or different sources to make sure that we speed up that access. That's also something that worries us. And the last thing, and it's very important, is that this year, the energy, I will say the power law, that is the one that was sanctioned by Congress 25 years ago, it's 25 years already. So we are looking forward for the mission to see all the challenges that we have ahead and make sure that also make a full revision on the institutions and institutional framework and the regulatory framework, and see the recommendations in order for us to adapt those.
So speaking of that, what lessons in terms, I know you did in Texas a lot, the whole question of using indigenous energy resources, especially in local communities and to bring prosperity. Could you talk a little bit about some of those lessons that goes precisely in the concern of how do you get 500,000 people who have no energy to have energy? And perhaps that's part of the answer of some of the things that you've done.
Obviously, building out your distribution system, but looking at some new ways to distribute that energy. But one of the things that we did to diversify the economy in the state was we made the decision, and this was in the early 2000s, that we were going to invest in wind energy. And to be able to bring that, the wind really blows well out in West Texas where I grew up, not so much in East Texas where the population is. So we need to be able to move that energy from where it was produced to where it's consumed. So we built a major power line to move the wind energy. But the other thing that happened with this was the economic development in rural areas where historically were agriculturally oriented communities, and young people had a propensity, like I did, to move away from that community and to go into away from that community. These wind farms created a lot of economic development, both in jobs created and in the wealth created for the people who allowed these turbines to be built on their property. So there's just a substantial economic concentric circles of influence goes out from the development of energy resources. Midland, Odessa today, which is sitting on top of the Permian Basin, this is anecdotal, but a story, I think, in the Wall Street Journal 3 months ago about a barber who had his little Airstream trailer that he went to the camps where the men are that are working in the oil field, and he's making over $100,000 a year cutting hair. So, you know, find your niche. When the energy development and the wealth that gets created, the jobs that gets created is massive. So this can happen in Colombia with the development of your energy resources.
So we're short of time, but I can't help but ask both of you the whole question of shale. Minister Suárez has been really in the hot seat. I congratulate her for being courageous. I think this is one of the issues you gotta take on and educate people. But I would love to share kind of I mean, you created a Blue Ribbon panel, they provided recommendations. Give us a context of what you went through. Where do you see the challenges in Colombia? And then perhaps have Secretary Perry address those challenges.
Well, regarding unconventionals, definitely it has been a very controversial topic. As you mentioned, Luis Alberto, part of the key thing is education. So I'm pretty concerned that people conclude themselves on unconventional on a Twitter with 140 characters, oil or water, while you need to read a full paper of 170 pages to understand why you can do it in a responsible way. So it's a very unbalanced discussion. I think that the most important thing that we did since we started office is that we understood the size of the decisions that Colombians were about to take. And saying yes or no both had a lot of implications. So that's why we set up this experts panel, and they concluded that we should go through an investigation pilot phase. And we are currently in this process of making sure how we can adapt all the recommendations made by the panel. And very important to mention that the panel of experts was set with people that are experts in environment, people that are experts in communities, and people that are experts in industry. So it's really, really a balanced panel. And one of the things that concerns me the most, and that maybe we need to, I will say, increase the volume of the awareness, and we will be releasing this afternoon our oil and gas reserves for 2018, is gas. Because gas is a key fuel for the energy transition. You cannot go through an energy transition without gas. It's absolutely key for mobility. It's absolutely key for being part of the battery of the system. And we are running out of gas. And if that happens, we will be seeing the gas that people use in their homes and the gas that is used for taxes maybe double its price, and we will lost our independence in terms of energy security, and we will lost and be dependent on Venezuela or other countries around for gas or other resources.
Yeah.
Secretary Perry wanted to put an LNG facility on the Pacific, but besides, coming from Texas, which, by the way, Eagle is probably the cheapest source of gas in the world today.
I think what, Maria, you're spot on in the education of the public. And I hope the media will be a good, willing partner as we help educate the people about the use of our technologies to develop these cleaner burning fuels. And if we don't use those cleaner burning fuels, and I think this is the really important part here, that the alternative is going to be dirtier burning fuels, people not being able to have access to electricity. The 500,000 people in Colombia that don't have access to electricity, that won't change. It'll only get worse. I don't consider this to be, a courageous thing. I think this is a smart thing. I think the president, yourself, are very, very wise in standing up and saying, I want a better future for my country. I want a better future for our environment that we live in. And the single most powerful way to do that is to use the innovation and the technology that we know works and we know is safe to develop that gas, to change over to that cleaner burning natural gas as we transition to even cleaner fuels in the form of wind and solar and small modular reactors. So my hat's off to you for your leadership, and our national labs, I'll offer them as a resource, some of the most brilliant, capable, and I think not representing anybody except the science as their foundation.
Thank you very much, Secretary. Thank you very much, Minister Suárez. Thank you for your time.